Booty shorts. A lot of shots were set up on the fly during principal photography by Daniel Pearl and Toby Hooper. One such shot, that Hooper would years later call the best shot in the film, was no exception. That shot, of course, being the iconic shot of Pam approaching the family house. Cinematographer Daniel Pearl was laying flat on a dolly with the camera tilted up. The goal of the shot was to make the house appear bigger and bigger in the frame as Pam approached it. Truck. For the film, Gunnar Hansen found Leatherface's voice while driving in Austin, Texas. I remember exactly where I was. I had just turned south on Rio Grande from 19th Street, just south of the university. In a once elegant neighborhood of multi-story houses slowly being transformed into funky offices for lawyers and architects, from somewhere deep inside, I let out a piercing, agonizing howl. A big howl. I had to stop the car. The hair was standing up on my neck and arms. An unpleasant tingle ran down my spine. I was frightened. I drove home and went to bed, pulling the covers over my head. I don't ever want to make that sound again. Escape hatch. When Sally, Marilyn Burns, escapes by jumping out the window, the glass was actually breakaway sugar glass, made by Bob Burns and Mary Church. In fact, Mary did the stunt of jumping out the window. A mattress and some empty boxes were placed outside the window for her to land on, but setting up the shot took a long time. With the humidity of the Texas summer, the breakaway glass began to dissolve. When I went through it, I was like a glass woman because now I had little particles stuck all over me because the stuff was wet, Mary said. If they'd waited probably another 45 minutes, I don't know if there'd been any glass in those windows. Chicken Nugget. The game's composer, Ross Tregenza, used real chickens for the audio for Nugget. He luckily had a close friend and fellow composer that owned a farm with several chickens. The name Nugget was born from brand strategy lead Matthew Zepp. The name is a nod to the longtime nickname of his nephew. car. In one notable scene in the original film, the cook approaches the house and sees the hitchhiker. They have an altercation at the truck where the cook beats the hitchhiker with a broom handle and clearly shows off the relationship between the two characters. The reason that the scene works so well is that it's entirely real. Jim Sedow, the cook, was actually beating Ed Neal, the hitchhiker. Car radio. The song on the radio when the hitchhiker is picked up in the van is Roger Bartlett's "Fool for a Blonde." Bartlett has said that Tobe Hooper chose the song because he thought the hitchhiker was a fool for Sally. During production, Gunnar Hansen was very generous to his co-stars, particularly during the chase scene. There was a shot where Sally, Marilyn Burns, was supposed to get her hair caught in a bush, but breaks herself free before Leatherface can catch her. When they shot the scene, though, Burns didn't run off as scripted. Hansen originally thought that she wanted to linger in front of the camera a bit for her close-up. Instead of going in for the kill, Hansen began using the chainsaw to trim the bush to give Burns more time. He later discovered that his assumption about why she stopped was completely wrong. Her hair had actually been caught in the brush and she could not get free. Burns recalled to Hansen, "Oh God, I thought you were going to really hurt me. When we were in the mesquite bushes and my hair was getting caught, well, you couldn't see through your stupid mask, and I don't know if that was a trick or not, but I was told you couldn't see, and you couldn't see where you were going. So I had to hurry and get out of there fast. I'm thinking, he's really going to get me. Plus, you were damn scary." Makeup set. Gunnar Hansen shared a lot of praise for his fellow cast members. In the 40th anniversary Blu-ray release's audio commentary, Hansen notes that actor Jim Sedow, the cook, was probably the only actor in the movie who could look benign and then become extremely evil without any makeup. Dinner scene. The infamous dinner scene was a long, trying shoot. Plastic surgeon W.E. Barnes created the makeup for Grandpa, and it took nearly 10 hours to apply to actor John Dugan. A lot of pieces and parts went into creating Grandpa's look. But because they were down to their last set of makeup parts, the crew had to shoot every scene involving Grandpa all in one day. The grueling shoot was one of the hottest days of the production, with temperatures over 100 degrees. The set windows were blacked out with black plastic in a house filled with cameras and lights that reached as high as 120 degrees inside. Because of the extreme heat on set, the food at the dinner table started to rot. The smell on set was ghastly for the entire cast and crew. All of the bones on the set were real, and combined with the lights that made them burn, released an unbearable smell. The combination of the stench with the extreme heat made a lot of the crew sick, and they'd take frequent trips outside to throw up. In the end, the brutal set brought a real rawness to the film. The shoot in total lasted nearly 32 hours for some of the crew. dinner scene. Cut her. According to Gunnar Hansen, he really cut Marilyn Burns' finger in the infamous grandpa feeding scene. The prop knife, designed to pump out fake blood, wouldn't work after several takes. Finally, when no one was looking, Gunnar Hansen removed the tape from the knife that made it dull and really cut Marilyn's finger. Knowing this, that would mean that actor John Dugan, Grandpa, sucked on the actual blood of Marilyn Burns. Kim and Toby before Texas. Kim Henkel and Toby Hooper met during the filming of Hooper's 1969 film Eggshells. 4 years later, they would go on to create the production company Vortex Inc. and co-create the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Another Texas Chainsaw actor was also part of the Eggshells cast. Alan Danziger, better known as Jerry to Chainsaw fans, co-starred in the earlier film. Possible titles. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre wasn't the first or even second title of the film. The first two working titles were Head Cheese and Leatherface. Head Cheese was the first working title of the film, though, for most of principal photography. Leatherface was the working title until late into production, when it was finally given the official title of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Kim Henkel and Toby Hooper intended for the title to be spelled Chainsaw. But once the press were sent information on the film, and when the original poster was produced, the spelling got twisted into Chainsaw. Cheap thrills. Screenwriter Kim Henkel has said that one of the reasons he and Toby Hooper wanted to make a horror film was their limited budget. If you have relatively little money, what are your possibilities? Henkel says. The clear answer was some sort of genre piece. Horror was the easiest because we felt that we didn't have to have any names in the cast. Production values weren't nearly so important as in some other realms, so it became the natural choice. Scaring a child. In the original movie shoot, the caterer, Sally Nicolau, was married to the location sound recordist, Ted Nicolau. The day they shot the meat hook scenes, Sally brought their then 3-year-old daughter, Karina, to set when she was delivering lunch. Unfortunately, little Karina saw Terry McMinn, Pam, on the meat hook and began crying and screaming. Her father recalled, "I was in the living room while we were shooting that scene, and she came running in and skidded to a stop and just went completely white, started screaming and crying, and went running out of the house." Curtain. Alan Danziger played Jerry, the van driver in the film. He prepared for his first on-camera meeting with Leatherface by being blindfolded. When the blindfold was removed for the initial take, he was so terrified that he ran out of the room. Ashtray. Actors are paid varying amounts for their work in film. For his voiceover in the opening monologue of the film, John Larroquette was paid with a single joint. Recent reports, however, suggest that his rate has gone up. Friend of Leatherface. Since both of her parents were working on the film, 3-year-old Karina Nicolau was often on set and struck up a friendship with Leatherface actor Gunnar Hansen. He recalled their interactions. "She had never liked my Leatherface mask. She was sitting with me one day while I waited for a shot setup. When Dottie, makeup artist Dorothy J. Pearl, came to put on my mask, it horrified Karina. As soon as it covered my face, she started screaming. I had Dottie pull it off. 'See?' I said, 'it's just me.' She calmed down, but when I put the mask on again, she started screaming again. I realized she was too young to make the leap, to see my transformation from Gunnar to Leatherface and understand that I was still under the mask. So I made sure she never saw me in the mask after that, at least until the unfortunate meat hook scene." One outfit, 32 days. Actors only had one set of their wardrobe. The actors had to wear the same clothing for the entire 32-day shoot, 12 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. For fear of fading or being damaged, they couldn't wash the clothes. So the actors wore the same clothes unwashed for 32 days straight, in 95 to 100-degree Texas heat. According to the crew, Gunnar Hansen stunk of body odor worse than anyone on set by the end of the shoot. Box office success. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre grossed over $30 million at the box office in North America and sold over 16 million tickets. With inflation, the film would have made over $150 million in box office earnings today. Hitchhiker's camera. The make and model of the Hitchhiker's camera is a Polaroid automatic 230 land camera. It was manufactured and distributed from 1967 to 1969. This camera previously belonged to Maria Flores. The hitchhiker stole it after she was stalked and kidnapped by Johnny. No living animals were harmed. Initially, art director Robert Burns wanted set pieces of real dead cats and dogs. The crew acquired dead animal carcasses from a veterinarian and actually tried to embalm them with formaldehyde. Makeup artist and production assistant Dorothy Pearl, at the time the wife of the film's cinematographer Daniel Pearl, was injecting a dead animal with formaldehyde when she accidentally injected into her own leg through the animal. Tobe Hooper then ordered that the dead animal carcasses had to be thrown out. The crew poured gasoline to cremate them, but the stench from the smoke from the bonfire started to make its way into the family house and added to an already foul stench set. Tobe meets the cook. Director Tobe Hooper offered the part of the old man, the cook, to Jim Seedow after they worked together in the 1971 film The Wind Splitter. They were both a part of the cast in said film. Hooper and Seedow weren't the only Texas Chainsaw Massacre alumni to work on The Wind Splitter. Ron Bozeman was the key grip, Kim Henkel was credited as the grip, and Sally Richardson was the assistant director. News of the day. Tobe Hooper wanted to parody the news reports of the day, which he considered televised lies, and so devised the opening voiceover, famously recited by actor John Larroquette. Hitchhiker's pocket knife. This weapon is a nod to everyone's favorite unlikable character, Franklin, from the 1974 film. According to creative director Ronnie Hobbs and designer Rob Fox, they knew the likelihood of Franklin ever appearing in the video game was slim to none, so this was their way of including him as a small Easter egg. Sissy's straight razor. After Kim Henkel and creative director Ronnie Hobbs finished designing Sissy's look and backstory, the only question left was what type of weapon would she carry. According to Kim's secret catalog of character concepts, he always envisioned Sissy wielding some type of straight razor, a small, portable weapon that could stay hidden until just the right time. It's petite and deadly, just like Sissy. It fit her personality perfectly. So even though the hitchhiker carries it in the original 1974 film, it did in fact previously belong to Sissy. As far as what happened to her, or where Sissy is during the 1974 film, well, that's a story for another time. spatter. One of the reasons that blood and gore are limited in the film is because Tobe Hooper and Kim Henkel felt that fear and intensity were more important. According to screenwriter Kim Henkel, he and Tobe Hooper reached out to the MPAA to discuss the guidelines to avoid getting slapped with an X rating. Apparently, the investors of the film were terrified that the film would get an X rating, so all these thoughts were front of mind during production. Ultimately, Hooper and Henkel's original vision of inflicting fear and intensity with the gore and blood implied worked to the film's benefit and made a bigger impact. Genuine bone furnishings. The bones used for props were real animal bones found at a veterinarian boneyard and a cattle pasture. Art director Robert Burns led the charge of designing most of the bone props. Like furniture, friend of Leatherface. Since production manager Ron Bozeman would go on to work on another film that featured cannibalism. In 1992, he won an Academy Award as a producer for The Silence of the Lambs. Spring of '73. Kim Henkel and Tobe Hooper spent January and February of 1973 writing the script, but production moved on rather quickly after that. They were shooting the movie by summer of 1973. Family name. The family has gone by several surnames throughout the course of the franchise. However, their original surname is Slaughter. Though never spoken in the movie, it can be seen in faint letters on the sign above the gas station, W.E. Slaughter Barbecue. According to Gunnar Hansen, art director Bob Burns made the sign. He said that Toby and Kim were mighty proud of coming up with We Slaughter. Jim Seadow's toughest scene to get right was the broomstick clubbing at the gas station. Since the prop was an actual wooden broom handle, he was afraid of hurting his fellow actor in the scene. After several takes of it looking fake, Seadow really struck his fellow actor in the final take. It was an exhausting shoot for everyone, but Marilyn Burns had it as bad as anyone on set. She did several takes of diving through the doorway of the gas station, and each time she would land knee first on the hard concrete floor. So many times that the floor tore up and severely bruised her knees. Ashtray. Preparing for the role. To prepare for the role of Leatherface, Gunnar Hansen went to Austin State School, which was a 95-acre residential and training facility for adults with developmental disabilities. He was there several days to pick up the residents' mannerisms and how they walked and talked. It was important to Gunnar to portray the character authentically, without making a mockery of those who suffer from developmental disabilities. Apprehension Engine. Gun Interactive's own Wes Keltner led the direction of music for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. One day, Wes was at home brainstorming, and in the background he had 2015's The Witch playing. He wasn't watching the film, but was more listening to it. The sounds and music in the film struck him as he was listening. He asked himself, what instruments are they using to make those unique sounds? It turned out, those sounds were created by an apprehension engine. Wes was able to track down Tony Dugan Smith, who makes roughly 6 of these instruments a year, and was informed that the apprehension engine took around 7 months to build. Wes then had the honor to have a meeting with film composer and creator of music for The Witch, Mark Corvin. It was at this meeting where Corvin said, "Forget everything you know about playing guitar and other instruments. Approach the apprehension engine like a child, and experience and discover." From there, the direction of sounds for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game were born. Grandma's rocking chair. The remains of the mummified grandma, or even any mention of grandma, was not in the original script. Art director Bob Burns added her into the set to show that there were women in the family's history. blood. The blood splatter effect on Leatherface's apron during the Franklin death scene required corn syrup, food coloring, and a lot of spitting. Makeup artist Dorothy Dottie Pearl, director Tobe Hooper, and even boom operator Wayne Bell knelt by Franklin during the shooting. As Leatherface slashed, the three took mouthfuls of blood and spit it at him. "For me, this was just a delight," said Bell. "I care nothing about horror movies, but this was pretty playful." Skin. The practical effects of Leatherface's skin mask proved a difficult challenge for Bob Burns, the art director for the film. Mary Church, who had multiple responsibilities on the original film, including continuity and stunt coordination, noted that Bob spent weeks trying to come up with just homemade varieties of stuff that sort of looked like dried skin. "I remember him being concerned about expression, or not being able to do expression, and that there probably needed to be other expressions maybe on the face." Mask, prop, or wardrobe for the role of Leatherface. When Gunnar Hansen had his first meet and greet for the role of Leatherface, Tobe Hooper and Kem Henkel were impressed with his size and stature. When Gunnar walked through the doorway into their meeting, Hooper noticed how much space of the doorway Gunnar took up. They knew right away that Gunnar had the physical traits for the iconic role. Masks. The Leatherface masks would become iconic, but they were hard to see through. Gunnar Hansen explained, "The masks had one unfortunate feature. Their eye holes were small. They fit snugly, but not around my eyes. And the further the eye holes were from my face, the less I could see. It was like looking down a long tube. I could see only what was directly in front of me." Tobe Hooper found novel ways to introduce drama into his picture. According to lead Marilyn Burns, Sally, Hooper would gossip around the set to create animosity between her and Paul Partain, who played Franklin. Tobe would come up and tell me that Paul said something about me. Then Tobe was going to Paul saying Marilyn said something about you, getting us really upset with each other. So we're doing this scene that didn't require any acting at all. I was ready to kill him. Leatherface mask. The holes and markings on the forehead of Leatherface's masks represent a hammer to the head. Back then, cows were slaughtered in the head with a sledgehammer, so the holes appear on the forehead of Leatherface's masks to show continuity with how actual cattle were slaughtered. How the music is made. Numerous instruments used by Wayne Bell to create the music were children's musical toys. According to Bell, many of the instruments used to create the music of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre were cymbals, xylophones, and shakers. Being that Bell is a drummer, a substantial number of cymbals were used. The audio team also used Bell's K stand-up 5-string bass with a movable bridge which allowed them to change how high off the board the strings are. This brought out the strong sounds of the bass. Additionally, the sound team used a bow, plucking and rubbing various items on it. Playing with fire. Early on during filming, Gunnar Hansen asked Tobe Hooper, "How are we going to shoot the scene where I get chainsawed in the leg?" Tobe Hooper replied, "I don't know, but don't worry about it because it's the last shot of the movie." For the climactic ending of the film, the crew wrapped a metal sheet around Gunnar Hansen's leg with a stake taped to it, and a blood bag taped on top of that. Originally, he thought it was a crew member who would run the chainsaw cutting into Gunnar's leg. But Gunnar insisted he would do it himself for fear of the crew member accidentally sawing his leg. The saw didn't have its actual teeth attached to it, so they had to make modifications to the saw itself. At first, Gunnar thought he had sawed his leg, but his leg did become badly burned from sawing into the metal plate that was protecting it. Flores photos. Several of the photos used for Maria Flores' story were taken near a massive sunflower field that seemed to go on for miles. While stunningly beautiful, this area was also infested with rattlesnakes. Thankfully, the Gun Interactive crew persevered after a few close encounters with the venomous snakes, and were able to capture thousands of photos to help build the lore of our game's catalyst, Maria Flores. torture. During Sally's torture scene, her screams ultimately led her to shout, "I'll do anything you want," which Marilyn Burns later recollected was the dirtiest thing you could say. It was pretty damn serious. Nowadays, it comes out of everybody's mouth. Now they're doing it for free, they're jumping into it. But in those days, "I'll do anything you want," you just didn't say that. You never said that. Burns continues, though, that Sally's torturers, the Slaughter family, don't comprehend that because it's not the result they desire. Rather, she feels that they're so sexually repressed that they can only manifest desire as sadistic cruelty. What makes them even more horrific is the sense that they gather excitement by watching women suffer. Behind-the-scenes photo, Bull. During research production for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, Gun Interactive's creative director Ronnie Hobbs, executive producer Ishmael Vicens, and brand strategy lead Matthew Zepp traveled to dozens of locations in rural Texas. Thousands of photos were taken to capture the essence and authenticity of the Texas countryside. During one of these trips, the team at Gun stumbled onto a farmhouse they thought was abandoned, but little did they know they would meet a new friend. A massive bull in a nearby gated field with horns that stretched 4 feet end to end. However, the gate itself was not closed, so the team from Gun found themselves face to face and only 5 feet on the other side of this open gate, with this giant freak of nature. The Gun crew were initially terrified, but they carefully and meticulously walked around the fence while keeping their eyes on this massive creature. They were able to shut the gate, and any crisis was thankfully avoided. Banned in the UK. The film was banned in over 10 countries, including Great Britain and Germany. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre managed to have screenings in London, England in late 1974, but by February of 1975, the BBFC decided to ban the film, as they were uncomfortable about the threats toward the film's climax and the explicit use of abnormal psychology, and refused to even give the film an X rating. In 1982, the former Prime Minister of England, Margaret Thatcher, along with socially conservative activist Mary Whitehouse, formed the Video Nasties, which led to the banning of several horror films in the United Kingdom. Additionally, in the early years of Prime Cable, channels like HBO refused to air the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Many cable channels avoided the film at all costs. Leatherface speaks. In the original script, the infamous dinner scene was quite different. Leatherface had scripted, though completely unintelligible, lines. As Gunnar Hansen recalls, they were written out. His first line is, "A-A-A-O-U-U-U-Ber," and then, "Abe-Goba Aji-Ima." According to Toby Hooper, these lines had actual meaning behind them. Hansen's script notes pointed out that the first line meant roughly, "How are you? Welcome home. Supper's almost ready." The next line meant, "I've been a good boy. I got 'em all." all-natural masks. Art director Bob Burns performed a significant amount of trial and error to perfect the Leatherface mask. Ultimately, he landed on liquid latex and thin insulation, which aged naturally and yellowed.